This video focuses on Dickens' A Visit to Newgate and the excerpt from Hard Times. Both of these readings are found on Canvas under Files under Electronic Resources. I want to first give you some information that helps us transition into Victorian literature. At the beginning, or toward the beginning of the semester, I gave you some information about the literary periods that we'll be looking at this semester. In the first period that's identified here is referred to as the Age of Johnson. Sometimes it's referred to as the Age of Sensibility, the Age of Enlightenment as well. The Age of Johnson, that name comes from the fact that Johnson was the one who put together the first true dictionary of the English language, which was published in 1755. We moved on to look at British Romanticism. Remember, we talked about how lyrical ballads helped to usher in that particular period. We're moving now into Victorian literature with one of the readings from the 1830s and the other reading from a little bit later, though, from the 1850s. The Victorian period, the dates I have here, actually the dates of when Queen Victoria ascended to the throne and when she passed away. Technically, we see in literature the early Victorian period from 1837 to 1870. It really is a transitional period, the dates that I just gave there, as truly Victorian literature really doesn't come to the forefront until the 1870s. Here we have a comparison of Romanticism and Victorianism, with the Romantic focuses on a utopian idealism, focuses on the common people and interest in the imagination. Remember, we talked about how Romantic literature suggests that truth is internal rather than external, and a revolt too against science, as we see with Mary Shelley. For Victorian literature, there's more of an interest in the utilitarian, what is useful. It reflects the harsh realities of the world. There is increasing focus on nationhood, which we'll see actually at the very end of the semester. More of an interest in the middle class. An emphasis on work being something that is utilitarian, and then a growing interest in representing realism in literature. I wanted to just show you briefly, and you can take a look at this in the PowerPoint itself, this map of Dickens' London. It's very interesting to see all the places that he writes about and where he sets his stories and his books. Although London plays a role in A Visit to Newgate, because that is where Newgate Prison is located, Hard Times is actually located in Coketown. That is a town very much like one in the Manchester, England area, in the more industrial area. I put in this image too to emphasize the point that with both of these writings we see the impact of increasing industrialization in England. Here, a more rural setting, but the city, the town, is being overtaken by the smokestacks of the industry. Hard Times is a short selection, but really interesting in what Dickens does here. Notice the colors that are used here, the representation of the town itself, and the way that industry has really become interwoven into the town's character. There are images of the red and black serpents. Redness and blackness, I think, suggesting too the way this place has become sort of like a living hell, that is equating the redness and the blackness with a satanic figure. There is an unnaturalness about this place too, the unnatural red and black, like the painted face of a savage. This is not a world that it seems like people exist within well. It's not the rural setting, for example, that we saw in Wordsworth. There's a sameness to the people and their lives in this place. There's no individuality. Every day was the same as yesterday and tomorrow, he says. Every year the counterpart of the last and the next. With industrialization, people working in factories, life seems to be filled with monotony. Work that seems endless but is very repetitive. He does point in this selection to the class divisions. It is as if the people who buy these goods don't recognize what's happening to the people that make them. Perhaps in part we can connect this to what we see in the media too about these sweatshops where clothing that we wear has been made, but oftentimes we turn a blind eye to the people who actually made those goods. In the world represented in hard times, religion doesn't seem to offer any answers. The church seems to blend in with the rest of the town setting. The school system, too, in the very last paragraph, about halfway through, or well, actually about 2/3 of the way through, you see the repetition of the word fact. Fact, 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 everywhere in the material aspect of the town. Fact, 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 everywhere in the material. The Chokum Child School was all fact. And the School of Design was all fact. And the relations between master and man were all fact. And everything was fact between the lying-in hospital and the cemetery, that is, between birth and death. The Chokum School was you see the impact here of a Scottishman who was well known in educational circles who emphasized the importance of an education that did not develop a child's imagination, but focused on a more regimented school system. That's what the reference is here. But this emphasizes the importance of, or the loss of, imagination as everything that the children learn is based on factual information on perhaps science, for example, without room for creativity. Also, I think that at the very end, sorry about the barking dog, at the very end of the selection that you have, you see Dickens ending with the word amen, suggesting perhaps for the context of this story, capitalism has become a sort of religion, that everything in these people's lives revolves around the production of goods for a capitalistic society. Central points that are made here that Dickens seems to want to get across: nothing matters but the bottom line, that is how much the company makes, not even people's lives. He addresses these questions too, or brings up these questions. What happens to people who live in a society where the human factor has been taken out? What happens in a society when the system is based on production and commodity? And should school be about the accumulation of facts? Should it cultivate, or should it instead cultivate, a child's imagination? The other reading that we have today focuses on Newgate Prison. This is an image of Newgate Prison in London. This was a prison that was closed down in the early 1900s. Actually, this image is a little bit later than the publication of Dickens' A Visit to Newgate, which was back in 1836. From the look of the individuals in the picture, it looks like this is later in the 1800s. His central aim here in A Visit to Newgate is prison reform. The story is structured, or the sketch is structured, as the narrator goes into the prison, almost like a reporter might, in order to see what is happening there, how the prisoners live, and the different aspects of the prison as well. So it's told in a sort of story format. He does describe these characters, though, as opposed to giving a straight newspaper article, which might attempt to sway people to prison reform. Here, instead, he gives a very personal face to people in the story who are impacted by the prison system. The setting that he describes, notice over on page 3, he describes as he goes into the building as entering a number of tortuous and intricate windings, guarded in their turn by huge gates and gratings, whose appearance is sufficient to dispel at once the slightest hope of escape. In many ways, this reminds me of Gothic literature. It kind of reminds me of Poe. It's sort of like the prison is like a house of horrors, a haunted house. In this selection, Dickens wants to show how the prison system breaks down human relationships. There are families that are separated. We see in the section that focuses on the women's section. First, there is the 21-year-old prisoner whose mom visits. Notice the description of these women, though. The mom is a creature so borne down in soul and body by excess of misery and destitution. The other family that we see is a daughter who is visiting her imprisoned mom. Dickens tells us, too, that the feelings between these people have been long forgotten. There seems no hope for them, no affection between them. These women, we do not know what their crimes are, but he places more emphasis on our seeing how the relationships with their loved ones have been broken apart. He tells us, too, after the section on the... Actually, this is the end of the section on, maybe actually sort of toward the middle of the section on women, that a large portion of the prisoners appear to have no friends at all. There aren't even friendships that can sustain people. Children who are in the prison, I'm thinking more specifically about the section about the boys under 14 who are there for pickpocketing for a minor crime. These are children who most likely came from situations where they were neglected as children, and that is what led them to the pocket picking. When he moves into descriptions of the men's section, the men, not the ones on death row, but the other men, they aren't allowed to have any close communications with their visitors. They aren't allowed the human touch. And think about what that does to a human being, not to have those connections. He also points to the fact that those imprisoned as well, they can be given negative attention. For example, there is that description as he first goes into the prison of the cast heads of the murderers. These individuals have received notoriety and attention because of the horrific crimes that they have committed. Also, in his description, too, of the boys under 14 who have pickpocketed, he refers to them as they actually seemed as pleased and important as if he had done something excessively meritorious in getting there at all. This one boy seemed pleased and important that he was getting attention, but obviously it is negative. It is attention because of his negative actions. I'm going to have to stop. This is the end of part 1.